imagine you find out that your child, the one you maybe thought was intellectually disabled, can actually read your mind.
Oh.
It's a bit of a mind bender, right?
Mm.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today, telepathy.
Yeah.
Specifically with non-speaking people.
Uh-huh.
Often, but not always folks with autism.
Right.
So we're going to be looking at firsthand accounts, what people are saying is actually happening.
Yes.
And the science behind it all. And what does it all mean, right?
Yeah.
What are the implications of all this?
Yeah.
Now, all this is based on the Telepathy Tapes podcast, specifically episodes 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8.
It's a rich source of information.
It is.
And really challenges a lot of our ingrained beliefs, I think, about communication, about consciousness,
Totally.
about what's even possible.
Yeah.
And we're going to see how these non-speakers are really changing our understanding of what's possible.
For sure. Okay, so let's start with Marianne Harrington. She was a teacher who kind of stumbled upon this whole thing with her non-speaking student, Jay. She had left some treats in her car.
Okay.
Had mentioned it to the class, and Jay drew pictures of them.
Wow.
But not just any treats, like the specific treats, a butter cookie, chocolate chips, a donut, even those little fish-shaped candies.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so, I mean, this was before Jay was using, a letterboard or any kind of device to communicate.
Right.
So it really throws into question, those traditional diagnoses,
Oh, yeah.
When we label someone as intellectually disabled, this case really shows that maybe there are intellectual abilities there that we just weren't aware of.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So for her to, see that, it must have been mind-blowing.
Right.
And this kind of brings us to spelling to communicate. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so spelling to communicate is a method where non-speakers can use letterboards or other devices to express themselves. So they're essentially pointing to letters.
Got it.
And, think of it as kind of bypassing the motor challenges of speech
Oh, interesting.
to unlock the complex thoughts and intelligence that were always there.
That's amazing. So they can actually have these complex thoughts and be intelligent, but just not have that ability to communicate it in the same way.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, for parents, it's like a roller coaster, right?
Absolutely.
When they find out their child can actually do this.
Yeah, it's a huge range of emotions. I
Yeah.
mean, relief, validation,
Yeah.
often anger at the system, how could this have been missed for so long?
Right.
But ultimately, I think a profound sense of hope.
Yeah, for sure. But then there's the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
Where people are like, wait a minute, is this real?
Right, exactly. There's skepticism.
Yeah.
And, I think it's understandable because some people believe that the facilitators, the people who are supporting the spellers, are unconsciously guiding their hand.
Okay. Yeah, I can see how people would think that.
Yeah.
So then how do we know that's not happening?
So researchers like Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell have developed some very rigorous tests
Okay.
to try to rule that out, to rule out facilitator influence. So picture this: a room with multiple cameras.
Okay.
The speller's blindfolded, and the person that they're reading the mind of is in a completely different location.
Okay, so they're not even in the same room.
No, completely separate. And then to take it even further, they'll use things like random number generators.
Okay.
So there are no predictable cues.
Right. So it's not they always do this when this happens.
Exactly.
No.
And here's the picker. Spellers are consistently hitting 100% accuracy.
100%. That's like if you were taking a test and you knew all the answers in advance.
That's exactly right. So that level of accuracy is really suggesting that something extraordinary is happening.
Yeah, it's not just chance. Right.
Right.
But this telepathy thing, it's not just limited to parent-child connections.
Right.
There's this story about Sam, who is a production assistant, and he's really skeptical.
Uh-huh.
But then, during filming, he decided to put it to the test. He wrote down the word friend, on a piece of paper.
Okay.
And he was just focusing on it in his mind. And before he could even finish thinking the word, Houston, who was one of the non-speakers, had started spelling it out on the letterboard.
Wow.
I mean, that's a conversion experience.
It is.
Right there. So if they can read the minds of people beyond, just their immediate family, what does that tell us?
It suggests that this isn't just some isolated phenomenon.
Right.
But that maybe telepathy is a more fundamental aspect of human consciousness than we've realized.
So it's a huge, shift in thinking.
It is.
It makes you wonder what other, hidden abilities we might have that you just don't even know about.
Right. And if we look back in history, there are these little hints. Like, did you know that Lucille Ball claimed that she once picked up a Morse code transmission through her dental fillings?
Wait, really? Lucille Ball, like the comedian?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It sounds wild, but it speaks to the possibility of this mind-matter interaction,
No, that's interesting.
which aligns with what we're seeing with these non-speakers.
So there's this guy, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. He's a biologist, and he's done some groundbreaking research on animal telepathy.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
So, like, humans aren't the only ones who might be telepathic.
It seems not. He had this parrot in Kisi who could accurately describe pictures that someone was looking at, even from different rooms.
That's wild.
It is.
What else?
And then there's this story about Lawrence Anthony, who was known as the Elephant Whisperer.
Okay.
When he passed away, 2 herds of elephants that he had worked with, they walked for miles to gather at his house, seemingly to mourn.
Oh, wow. Like, how'd they even know?
Right. It suggests this deep connection between living beings
Yeah.
that goes beyond, like, our conventional understanding.
Totally. And so this kind of ties into savant syndrome too, right? Where individuals, they display these extraordinary abilities in specific areas, like math or music,
Uh-huh.
but without traditional learning.
Right?
So both telepathy and savant syndrome, they challenge that, like, dominant scientific view that consciousness is just a product of the brain.
Exactly. It's like, are we missing something here?
It seems like
Is
it.
there more to consciousness than we've been led to believe?
Yeah, it's like a whole paradigm shift.
Exactly. And there's actually scientific research that supports this shift.
Okay.
There's this widely replicated study called the Gansfeld experiment,
Okay.
and it's shown statistically significant results that support the existence of telepathy.
So we're seeing this evidence coming from, like, all these different areas.
Yeah.
So, like, if we accept telepathy as real, what are the implications of that?
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
These non-speakers who have been marginalized, underestimated,
Yeah.
they could hold the key to revolutionizing our understanding of consciousness.
That's amazing.
They might teach us how to unlock new levels of communication, of understanding, even creativity.
I mean, that could change, like, how we approach education, therapy, even just how we interact with each other.
Exactly.
That's a huge deal. But you mentioned the hill earlier.
Yes.
What is that, and how does that fit into all of this?
So the hill is fascinating. It's described by non-speakers as a telepathic space
Okay.
where they connect and communicate with each other.
Okay.
So they're transcending those limitations of physical language or distance.
So it's like a mental meeting place.
Yeah, like a telepathic internet almost.
Yeah.
It's like a whole secret world that we're just starting to get a glimpse of.
That's so interesting. Before we, like, dive deeper into that, though,
All right.
you were talking about this thing called psi phenomena.
Right.
What is that exactly?
Yeah, so psi phenomena refers to experiences that suggest that the mind can influence the physical world or receive information beyond the known senses.
Okay.
So things like telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, that kind of thing.
It's all that spooky stuff.
Yeah, all the fun stuff.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. This is, like, seriously mind-blowing.
It is.
So where do we go from here?
Well, you mentioned Houston and his ability to hear everyone's thoughts.
Right.
That's where we should go next.
Okay.
Imagine being bombarded by a constant stream of thoughts from everyone around you.
Oh, my gosh.
It's got to be overwhelming.
Yeah.
So we'll explore that experience
Okay.
and what it means in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into telepathy and non-speakers.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything we talked about last time. It really is like a whole new way of thinking about communication and consciousness.
It challenges a lot of assumptions, yeah.
Totally. So you mentioned we'd be talking more about Houston and his experience of hearing everyone's thoughts.
Right.
Which sounds like a superpower and also kind of terrifying all at the same time.
It's wild to think about, right? It's like, imagine being constantly bombarded by thoughts from everyone around you.
It'd be like trying to have a conversation in a room where everyone's talking at once.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Except you're hearing their thoughts, not their
I
voices.
can't even imagine, like, how do people like Houston even cope with that?
Well, it highlights how important it is to really understand and be sensitive to the sensory experiences of non-speaking individuals.
Right.
You know, instead of trying to fit them into our world, we need to create environments that are supportive and understanding of their unique ways of experiencing things.
I like to meet them where they are.
Exactly. And that includes acknowledging these telepathic abilities.
Right, even if it's, like, way outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes you wonder if we've lost touch with something, like some innate human ability to connect in a way that we don't even understand anymore.
It's a really interesting thought.
It is. And speaking of connection, we were talking about the hill before.
Yeah.
That telepathic space where non-speakers can connect. How can we even begin to grasp something like that?
Well, one way is to look at the work of Dr. Dean Radin. He's a scientist who's been studying consciousness and what we call psi phenomena for decades.
Can you remind me what psi phenomena is again?
Yeah, it basically refers to all those experiences that suggest that the mind can influence the physical world or receive information beyond our normal senses.
Okay, right.
So things like telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition,
Okay.
all that stuff. And Dr. Radin's research suggests that consciousness might not be limited to the brain, that it might be a fundamental property of the universe itself.
Okay, now we're getting really out there. What kind of evidence is there for that?
Well, think about it. If consciousness isn't confined to our physical bodies, then it opens up the possibility that we're all interconnected in ways that we haven't even begun to understand.
Okay, yeah.
And that interconnectedness could explain how non-speakers can communicate telepathically, not just with people who are physically near them, but also those who are far away.
So, like, the hill could be a manifestation of that interconnected consciousness.
Exactly, like a place where those connections are amplified and easier to access.
That's amazing. And it's interesting because a lot of cultures throughout history have talked about, like, a non-physical realm where consciousness can interact.
That's right.
So maybe the hill, as these non-speakers are describing it, is like a modern-day expression of that ancient wisdom.
It's definitely possible.
Like we're rediscovering something that's been known for a long time, but got lost somewhere along the way.
Maybe. But, it's important to remember, too, that this isn't just some abstract philosophical concept.
Yeah.
These are real people with real experiences. Like, remember Akil from the podcast?
Yeah.
He was saying how frustrating it was that people didn't just automatically read his mind.
Right. He was like, it's so obvious. Why doesn't everyone do this?
Exactly. It's like it was just so natural to him. He couldn't understand why it wasn't the norm. It really highlights how different their experience of the world is from ours.
It makes you think, like, what are we missing out on by not being able to tap into that?
Exactly. What insights might they have about reality and consciousness and human potential that we're completely blind to?
It's a big question.
Hmm.
But as fascinating as all this is, we can't ignore the ethical side of things either.
Right. Absolutely.
We have to approach this with sensitivity and respect for the individuals involved. What are some of the specific ethical concerns we should be thinking about?
Well, one big concern is exploitation. We need to make sure these individuals are protected from being taken advantage of or used for their abilities without their full consent.
Yeah, especially given their communication challenges, how can we even be sure that they're freely choosing to engage in telepathic communication?
It's a tricky question, but it's crucial to make sure their voices are heard, that their autonomy is respected, and that they have the support they need to make informed choices.
Absolutely.
Another concern is privacy.
Oh, yeah, big time.
If telepathy is real, we need to rethink how we approach the privacy of thoughts altogether.
It's like a whole new frontier.
It is. It's uncharted territory, both scientifically and ethically.
So we're going to need some new rules of the road.
We will. It's going to require a lot of collaboration between scientists, ethicists, non-speakers, and their families to figure out how to navigate this responsibly and compassionately.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the science to the ethics to the philosophical implications. What's the main takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to keep an open mind.
Yeah.
We can't just dismiss these experiences because they challenge our current understanding.
Right. We have to remember we're talking about real people here with unique abilities and perspectives who deserve our respect and compassion.
Exactly. This isn't just some intellectual exercise. It's about recognizing the humanity and potential of a group of people who have been marginalized and misunderstood.
And who knows, maybe by listening to their experiences, we might even unlock something within ourselves
It's possible.
and expand our own understanding of what's possible. But there's still more to explore.
There is. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll hear from some of these non-speakers directly, and we'll see how their stories bring all of these concepts to life.
So we've talked about the science and the ethics surrounding telepathy, especially with non-speaking individuals. But now I think it's time to really hear some personal stories
Yeah.
to see how all this actually plays out in people's lives. You mentioned there were some cases from the Telepathy Tapes podcast that really stood out to you.
Yeah, there are a few that I found really powerful.
Okay, cool.
One that really stuck with me was the story of John Paul and his girlfriend Lily. They're both non-speaking, and they both use spelling to communicate.
Okay, so they're both navigating the world without spoken language,
I
and then they find each other. Like, how does that even happen?
It's a testament to human connection. Even when there are these communication challenges, they actually met through their therapists who were
Oh.
both familiar with spelling to communicate.
So, like, their therapists were the matchmakers?
Kinda.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It started with pen pal letters, then progressed to spending time together.
Wow.
And eventually, it blossomed into this really deep and loving relationship.
That's so sweet. But what makes their relationship particularly interesting, like, in the context of telepathy?
Well, both John Paul and Lily have reported that they can communicate telepathically. Like,
Yeah.
they have this mind-to-mind connection.
So it's not just a matter of practicality, it's actually a deeper level of intimacy.
Exactly. It seems like this telepathic connection has actually deepened their bond in a really profound way.
It makes you think about intimacy and connection in a whole new light.
Yeah.
Like, if telepathy is real, then maybe true understanding can happen on a much deeper level.
A more intuitive level.
But we were talking about the ethical considerations before. Are there any concerns that come up with John Paul and Lily's story?
Yeah, it does raise questions about consent.
Oh, right.
Like, how can we be sure that they're freely choosing to engage in this telepathic relationship?
Especially given the communication challenges.
Exactly.
So how was that addressed in their case?
Well, both John Paul and Lily were able to clearly express their desires and their feelings through their therapists.
Okay.
And it was clear that they were both willingly participating in the relationship.
It sounds like they were really empowered to make their own choices.
Yeah. But their story also brings up another ethical concern, which is the potential for misuse of telepathic abilities.
Oh, right.
If people can read each other's minds, what's to stop that information from being used for harmful purposes?
It's a scary thought.
It is.
Like, imagine the implications for marketing, for politics, even for personal relationships.
Right.
If someone could just tap into your thoughts without you knowing.
Exactly. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Telepathy has this potential for incredible connection, but also for manipulation,
Right.
for exploitation.
Exactly.
It seems like we're just at the very beginning of understanding this and figuring out how to navigate it ethically.
I think we are. It's going to take a lot of open and honest conversations to develop safeguards and make sure this is used responsibly.
So John Paul and Lily's story is so powerful.
It is.
Are there any other cases that you think really highlight this complexity?
Yeah, there's one more I wanted to share. It's the story of Ben and his father, Arthur. Ben is non-speaking and uses a letterboard to communicate.
Okay.
And Arthur, his dad, is a scientist. And initially, he was really skeptical about all this telepathy stuff.
So another one who came around because of personal experience.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like that's a common theme.
It is. So Arthur started noticing that Ben would often respond to his thoughts or his needs before he even said anything out loud.
Oh, wow. So, like, he might be thinking about getting a glass of water.
Right.
And Ben would spell out water.
Exactly.
So, like, all those little everyday moments started to make him question things.
Yeah. And because he's a scientist, he actually started doing formal tests.
Oh, wow.
He'd think of a word or a number, and Ben would consistently spell it out correctly.
It's amazing how far a parent's love will go.
It really is. And I think what makes Arthur's story so compelling is that he represents that bridge between science and open-mindedness.
Right. He didn't just shut it down because it sounded crazy.
Exactly. He approached it with a critical eye, but he was also willing to consider that maybe there was more to the world than he knew.
And I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It is.
It pushes us to question our assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
to embrace the mystery of the human mind.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the science to the ethical dilemmas.
Yeah.
And then to these incredible personal stories.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface.
We have.
But I hope this has given our listeners a starting point for their own exploration.
Me too. If these non-speakers are really more in tune with this telepathic dimension,
Right.
what might they be trying to tell us? What wisdom might they hold that we've been too quick to dismiss?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
One we should all be asking ourselves. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of telepathy and non-speaking individuals.
It's been a pleasure.
To our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep an open mind.
I would have been on top of the charts, but it's politics. You do some gimmick shit and post, you get a lot of clicks. Drop some real shit and they probably won't acknowledge it.